Welcome everybody, whoever's joining us here for the WSR information session, specifically for Ginoogaming, I believe, Don, this week?
That's correct. Yep.
So why we're doing this, I guess, for folks online is, when we submitted our WSR terms of reference, it was specified in the approval that we have to do, quote, 3 rounds of consultations specific for each of the communities we're dealing with. And in that 3 rounds, offer information related to where we are in the stage of the EA. So this is round 1. We're doing this from April to end of August. And this is not the only session we're offering the First Nations. We're very open and flexible for other information, whether online or on site or in person, on very specific topics if need be, as well. So what else I was going to say? Am I missing anything, Don?
No, Mike, I just wanted to introduce, we have Marianne from the community who is on the call today, and we also have Kim from Four Rivers as well. So as Mike said, the purpose of this presentation is to reintroduce you to the project if you're not familiar with it, and then take you through to see where we are now with the project. And so it's a pre-recorded presentation, and then after the presentation, we're going to have Michael and I will have a discussion, and we may have a broader discussion because we have some guest experts on here today. We've got the project manager, Craig Wallace, and the biology lead for the project as well, Angela Brooks. And so we're going to discuss the issues that were raised by Ginoogaming during the terms of reference period and during the call we had with the community. I believe it was November 25th, 2020, so it was quite a while ago. So we'll have that discussion, and then we're going to open it up to questions and comments on the project, and then we'll go from there. So yeah, without further ado, let's play the presentation, and we'll come back in about 30 minutes and continue our discussion.
Just one thing, Don, if you don't mind. So we do have Fred Jacob as well, offering simultaneous translation. And so there's an option there if members come in that want to hear it in Webequie. So Fred Jacob has been translating for Ottawa for a long time, as well as for the NAN Chiefs Assembly. So he's very skilled in what he does. So he's around too, if as other members may come in during the presentation.
And Mike, I'm glad you brought that up because Fred's also a Webequie community member, and as is Leslie Spence, who's on with us today, live from Thunder Bay, right, Leslie? There he is. Okay, so let's go ahead with the presentation, and then we'll come back and have a discussion.
Can you wait a couple minutes?
Sure, of course. Welcome to the Webequie Supply Road Environmental Assessment Phase Round 1 presentation. Today we are going to talk about the environmental assessment. We will do that right now. I will, there we go, good.
Sorry about that, she just texted me now.
No problem at all.
And yeah, Mandy LaBelle still there.
Sounds like it, Don.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So let's start the presentation, and like I said, we'll come back and talk about the issues raised previously by Ginoogaming, and then we're going to have a question and comment session after that. So let's watch the video, and then we'll come back. Welcome to the Webequie Supply Road Environmental Assessment Phase Round 1 presentation. Today we are going to talk about the environmental assessment steps, what we have learned from communities, the importance of Indigenous knowledge, road route alternatives, and what happens next. For background, Webequie First Nation is about 250 kilometers from the Hudson Bay and James Bay coasts, and the road runs south of Webequie and then east to the Ring of Fire area. The purpose of the Webequie Supply Road is to move people and supplies to the Ring of Fire area, create jobs and business opportunities for community members, as well as skills training opportunities for young people. This would be done in a way that will preserve and strengthen the community's language and culture. The road will be 107 kilometers long, with 17 kilometers of the length actually within Webequie First Nation reserve lands. The corridor planning area is 2 kilometers, but the actual cleared area will be 35 meters. The road will make 3 large water crossings, one across Winnisk Lake and the other 2 across rivers. And the project will also include temporary pits and quarries, equipment storage areas, and construction camps. Now we are going to talk about the environmental and impact assessment processes. There are 2 environmental assessments actually going on. There's an Ontario or provincial one and a Canada or federal one. Webequie is also doing their own internal assessment of the project. At the end, one report is created for review by Ontario and Canada. There is coordination between the federal and provincial EA processes at different points in the process. One body of documentation, though, one report, one body of documentation will be produced to address requirements of both the terms of reference, which is the provincial work plan for the EA, and what we call the tailored impact statement guidelines, which is basically the work plan from the federal side. Now we are going to talk about the communication we have had with Indigenous communities. When we were developing the work plan for the environmental assessment, also known as the terms of reference for the provincial environmental assessment process, we created a project website. We sent notices to communities, did virtual and in-person community meetings, and made project information available in many ways, such as through the website or by mail. And we've also accommodated during COVID by switching a lot of our in-person meetings to virtual meetings. We have received comments on the environmental assessment terms of reference or environmental assessment work plan from many First Nations and First Nation organizations. These comments are wide-ranging. They talk about many, many different topics. Some of the topics are focused on Aboriginal and treaty rights and interests. There's cumulative effects and the need for regional assessment. So looking at the broader effects of the project and looking at the project from a much sort of higher level in combination with other projects that are either planned or exist in the area. We heard comments on protocols, so ways of communicating with communities and the consultation process. We heard comments on environmental assessment or impact assessment, the actual undertaking of that work. And then we also received comments on participation in capacity funding, providing resources to communities so that they have the capacity to be able to review documents and conduct their own, for example, Indigenous knowledge studies. There were other comments on ownership and maintenance or operations of the road. There were comments on socioeconomic impacts of the project. There were a number of comments on climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, as well as water or water quality, and wildlife and plants had many comments as well. So there were comments from a lot of communities, a lot of First Nation organizations, and about many different subjects. Let's move now to talk a bit about the study plans. There are many studies involved in an environmental assessment. The technical team had to prepare detailed plans explaining to the federal government how these studies will be done. So these are very detailed sort of recipes as to how the work will be undertaken um, at a very technical level, and these were reviewed by the federal government, by experts in the federal government. So there were a number of different technical study plans prepared, and the subjects include geology, terrain and soils, surface and groundwater, air quality and climate change, noise and acoustic, vegetation, wildlife, fish and fish habitat, species at risk, socioeconomics, human health, visual environment, and cumulative effects. Our team also prepared fact sheets to summarize. Now we will talk about how an environmental assessment is done. There are many steps involved in an environmental assessment. One of the steps is to identify what we call valued components. Valued components are the environmental, health, social, economic, or additional elements or conditions of the natural and human environment that may be affected by the project and are important to community members, are of concern or value to the public, Indigenous peoples, federal, provincial authorities, and interested party. They are what people are concerned about. Then we have indicators. Indicators represent the resource, feature, or issue related to a valued component, so what's important to community members. And if these indicators are changed, they may demonstrate an effect on the environment. A better way probably to describe them is a way of measuring potential effects. And it's used in the assessment and evaluation of alternative routes and the overall effects of the project. Now let's talk a bit about assessment boundaries. For each thing that community members think is important to study in an environmental assessment, a valued component, a study area needs to be defined. These are different depending on the valued component, and that's a very important thing to remember. So there are three general study areas. What we call the project area or project footprint. Then we have 1 kilometer on either side of the road center, which is called the local study area, and the regional study area, which is 5 kilometers on each side of the center line of the road. Those are the general study areas. And this next map shows the three basic types of study areas relative to the two alternatives, the community-based alternative and the technically preferred alternative, which looks at the community-based alternative and makes minor changes to the route based on better terrain and soils and other factors. Let's now talk about the study areas for valued components more specifically. The study areas for valued components, or things that are important to community members, are determined by many different things, including what community members are saying, Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous land and resource use, and Aboriginal and treaty rights. Now we're going to move to talk a little bit about baseline studies. Think of baseline studies as a way of finding out the way things are now, so what we call existing conditions. And if we know that, we have something to compare to when looking at possible impacts of the project. So it's a snapshot, a picture of the way things are before the project. There are many studies that are done as part of an environmental assessment. These studies look at three general areas: the natural, or what we call biophysical, socioeconomic, and cultural. They're all under these categories. For example, let's look at natural or biophysical. Within that, we would have studies on vegetation, such as the peatlands or wetlands and forests, wildlife, fish and fish habitat, species at risk, air quality and climate change, noise and vibration, visual environment, surface water, groundwater, and geology, terrain, and soils. So there are many studies on the natural or biophysical, in the natural or biophysical category. Now, if we look at the socioeconomic, infrastructure and social services, then we might look at human health. Might look at land and resource use, or indigenous knowledge and land and resource use. Then we look at another major category of studies, which is archaeological resources or built heritage or cultural heritage landscapes. So there are many groups of studies, and even within the studies that I mentioned, there are more studies that are done, more specific studies. For example, if we were to look at caribou, there are a number of different types of caribou studies that are done as part of an environmental assessment or an impact assessment. Let's now look at select valued components as examples. And this will hopefully help everyone sort of better understand what I've just been talking about. So let's look at study areas for wildlife. The general or local study area would be a 1 kilometer buffer, as I mentioned before, from the center line of the alternatives. 500 kilometers from what we call supportive infrastructure. So these are things other than the road that are required as part of the construction or operation of the project. These might be camps or aggregate or rock source areas or access roads. And then the regional study area, general regional study area, extends 5 kilometers on either side of the local study area boundaries. If we look at moose, for example, that has a different local study area. In that case, it's 10 kilometers from the center line of the alternatives, 500 meters from supportive infrastructure, but the regional study area extends 50 kilometers from either side of the local study area boundaries. Then we look at caribou. Caribou have an 11 kilometer buffer from the center line of the two alternatives, and from the same distance from supportive infrastructure camps. So it has a bigger distance around it to define the local study area. And then the regional study area for caribou includes entire ranges of caribou, which is these are very, very large areas. Next, and finally for wildlife, let's look at wolverine. Wolverine has an 11 kilometer buffer from the center line of the alternatives and from the supportive infrastructure, and it extends 50 kilometers from either side of the local study area boundaries. Let's have a look now what that means in terms of maps. So these next few maps will illustrate the different types of study areas I just discussed. So this first one is the general study areas that I was talking about. The next slide shows the different local and regional study areas for moose. And then after that, we have the wildlife study areas for wolverine. So as you can tell, you can see the 50 kilometer buffer around there, much larger area. And then finally, the largest study area you can see here, you can see the local study area on the actual map, and then the regional study area, which includes two ranges for caribou, and that is in the upper right corner. So it's a much larger area. So let's talk a little bit about wildlife again and some of the criteria or valued components associated with wildlife, just to give you an idea of and a better understanding through examples. So for wildlife, you might have forest birds, you might have raptors, you might have shorebirds or waterfowl, or bog and fen birds like muskeg birds and other wetland birds. You might have bats or fur-bearing animals like lynx or rabbits. Ungulates, which are moose, for example. Amphibians and reptiles, and then pollinating insects as well. So the indicators or the ways of measuring those could be, for example, changes to habitat availability, the quantity of habitat available. Is that impacted by the road? Could be changes to abundance, meaning actual numbers, or the distribution, the spatial distribution, where these animals are over the land or water. Could be changes in the species richness. And we talk about that, we mean the diversity of species, the number of different species. Could be changes to survival and reproduction. Could be changes to to predator access, habitat use, and population. Or it could be changes in wildlife mortality or due to stress from. So let's talk a little bit about the baseline studies for birds. Spring and fall aerial water bird surveys were conducted in 2019 and 2020. And some of the things that we found were that the large lakes, and this isn't that surprising, were staging areas for waterfowl. Smaller lakes and rivers aren't really used that much by migrating waterfowl. We also conducted breeding bird surveys in 2020 and 2021, and we did listening counts at 263 stations. And we also used things called acoustic recording units at many different locations, actually 89 different locations, to listen to the sounds in these areas. The next slide shows some pictures that were taken from our breeding bird survey fieldwork. We also conducted baseline studies on bats to look basically for how many species are present. So we looked at, as I mentioned, bat diversity or number of species, and we used listening devices, what we call ultrasonic recorders. And we did surveys at 10 different locations. We found 5 species of bat, including the little brown bat, which is endangered in Ontario. We conducted a number of baseline studies on caribou as well. Caribou aerial surveys were conducted in 2018, 2019, and 2021. These are aerial surveys where we have biologists looking down and counting the number of caribou and identifying male, female, and making other observations about other large mammals. We also conducted in 2020 a caribou calving study, both by foot and by helicopter. We conducted a caribou collaring study in 2021, and that helped us identify calving areas where community members where caribou would have their young, winter areas, and identify travel corridors by being able to track the individual caribou across the landscape. And so far, the data has shown that most collared caribou are of what we call the eastern migratory population that winters in wooded areas, but actually has their young along the Hudson Bay shoreline. Next are a few pictures of some of our from some of our caribou aerial surveys. And then the slide after that shows photos from our collaring study as well. So let's talk a little bit next about baseline studies for wolverine and amphibians. We conducted, starting in 2021, a wolverine occupancy study. And so we set up sampling stations called run poles that at 25 different sites within 10 kilometers of the planned road center line. And then these stations were set up to include what we call snag posts to collect hair from the animals that would visit. And then there were wildlife cameras set up. From this work, not only did we get a boundary of Wolverine in Ontario, and we've gotten some really interesting results from that. We also did some amphibian studies where we sampled for calling frogs by using these acoustic recording units that we had set up for breeding bird studies. And this allowed for evening surveys to be done in these remote muskeg or wetland areas that we wouldn't be able to get access to otherwise. So next, let's move on to talk a little bit about Indigenous knowledge. A big part of an environmental assessment is Indigenous knowledge. We have, with the Webequie Supply Road project, an Indigenous knowledge program. We need communities to share their Indigenous knowledge with the technical team to help us identify potential project effects. This helps us avoid or reduce potential effects on Indigenous rights and interests. As part of doing this work, we take the Indigenous knowledge that we are able to collect. We make sure that it is kept confidential to whatever degree the community would like us to. And then we combine this information with the Western science information to very comprehensively identify impacts of the project. We want to work together with your community to collect important Indigenous knowledge. As I mentioned, we will respect the need for confidentiality. We have communicated with communities about the need to collect Indigenous knowledge for the project, and we've also invited communities to participate in our Indigenous knowledge program. So again, this is a very, very important part of this environmental and impact assessment, collecting Indigenous knowledge, and we really would like to encourage communities to provide that input to us so we can make sure that we've assessed impacts of the project very, very thoroughly. Let's move now to talk a bit about consideration and evaluation of alternatives. We have different route alternatives that have been developed by working with community members. Of the two alternatives, one is what we call the community preferred route, and the other is based on where the best land for road building is. So it's sort of the technically preferred route. We're also looking at different locations for sources of road building material, such as gravel and rock. This next map shows the two alternatives. In yellow is the community preferred route, which was derived by Webequie First Nation members meeting over a fairly long period of time to discuss the best possible route for the road. And then the green line represents technically preferred version of that route, looking at the best areas to travel through in terms of best terrain to build in generally, and other factors as well. Each alternative does get evaluated in detail, and there are many factors involved in that evaluation, such as natural environment, Indigenous knowledge, land and resource use and interest, socioeconomic and cultural heritage, and of course the technical side, cost, constructability, and safety. And the purpose of the evaluation of these routes and aggregate or rock sources is to identify a preferred route and preferred locations for sources for aggregate and rock that has the least potential for bad effects, for negative effects, and the greatest opportunity for controlling those negative or bad effects, and offers the community the greatest benefit as well. The evaluation of alternatives also considers other facilities that are part of building the road, such as temporary access roads to get to those gravel pits and quarries, for example, to get to the laydown and storage yards, construction camps, as well as bridges. Let's talk a little bit about consultation approach and next steps. We will be talking to communities in the next few months. We have 3 rounds of consultation planned as part of the environmental assessment phase of the project. This presentation is for round 1. But as you can see in this slide, we have the 2 other rounds, round 2 coming up hopefully in fall of 2022, and in winter or spring of 2023, the final round, round 3. This round talks about the overall IA process. It talks about the IK program. It talks about criteria and indicators, the evaluation of alternatives. The next round, round 2, will summarize the input that we got, identify alternatives, identify preferred routes for the road and aggregate or rock source areas, and provide some preliminary engineering design elements. And then finally, round 3 will be a summary of round 2, what we found in round 2, and a summary of preliminary effects, early effects based on our analysis of the project, and proposed ways of managing project impacts or mitigating impacts, limiting or controlling impacts, and then talking about follow-up monitoring, either during construction or post-construction. We will be collecting your feedback on the project in many ways, including community meetings, interviews, open houses, live streaming sessions, the project website, and social media. There are many different ways available to collect feedback from your community, and we welcome input from you in terms of how you would like to communicate with us. In terms of next steps, let me just talk about where we are here now. We are looking for input to finalize the criteria and indicators, as well as identify study areas for the valued components. We're looking to continue with our baseline studies and collect Indigenous knowledge. Now in fall of 2022, we're looking for input to evaluation of alternatives and selection of the preferred route and locations for the construction material sources, aggregate and rock. And we'll be doing the preliminary engineering design of the road. Then, in winter of 2023, we'll be getting input to preliminary effects, assessment of the project, and input to proposed impact management, mitigation, and follow-up monitoring. And then finally, in the summer and fall of 2023, there would be a review of the draft and final environmental assessment report or impact statement, the document that goes to both the provincial and federal governments. We want to hear from you. Please provide us with your comments through the project website, which is supplyroad.ca. Speak with the project team after the presentation. Fill out a feedback form. We have contact information on the screen for you. We welcome your input. We will respond to you, and it will make the environmental assessment and impact assessment better with your input. Thank you for joining us today. Miigwech, and we will see you soon. Okay, we are back, and now we're going to talk a bit about the issues that were raised by Ginoogaming during the terms of reference period, and then most especially during the community meeting we had on November 20th, 2020. So Mike, and I think Mike's on there. One of the issues that was brought up was capacity funding. And unfortunately, this is an issue that's outside of our control, isn't it, Mike? It's a provincial responsibility.
Yes, just give me 1 second. I'm gonna put on my headphones. Get better microphone on this. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, so capacity funds, there's a memorandum of understanding between Webequie First Nations WSR project team and the provincial crown through the Northern Development Mines division, and well, probably Northern probably just mines now. I think they separated them this past election. So, and in that MOU, which it's publicly available, it states that any request for resources will be referred to Ontario for that. So I'm not sure what the process is and how they determine whether resources are required, on part of Ontario. You would have to talk to Ontario in terms of if they've demonstrated their interests, their Aboriginal interests or rights are affected within the study area of Webequie Supply Road. So I think that's how they do it. And they make decisions, I guess, based on whatever available information they have within the study area. And with that information, they actually are open to receive further information from any Indigenous communities in their assessment of potential impacts on Aboriginal interests and rights.
So, Mike, if they were to contact them again, it's Jason Frechette, I guess, is the person to talk to. Would it be?
I believe that's the first point of contact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
I've got my hand up there, Don. Is that okay?
Sure. Absolutely.
All right. I'd love to hear if any of the Ginoogaming members on the line have anything extra to contribute. But Ginoogaming has gone back and forth with the province to date, and there's essentially a flat-out refusal to support Ginoogaming in participating in this environmental assessment in any manner. So what does the Webequie Supply Road team expect Ginoogaming to do regarding participation in this EA? I mean, there's no funds for technical support, there's no funds for staff, and therefore there is no voice from Ginoogaming on this environmental assessment. I know we had that one meeting back in November. That was Ginoogaming reaching out to Webequie, and we're glad we had that single meeting, but there's no capacity to support even in this today.
Right. So you had formal correspondence back and forth by, I guess, the Crown representative of Ontario.
Yeah, the final letter came back from Laurie Churchill on January 15th, 2021, basically stating, I mean, the gist of it is, unless Ginoogaming can prove that they've got a direct footprint overprinted by your study area, then they're not going to be providing any form of support. So it doesn't matter that this road will eventually connect to the Ring of Fire. It doesn't matter that the road will eventually provide traffic that's going to go through their homelands directly down through Geraldton. That doesn't matter. So they've come back with, you have to give us more information, but we don't know what the magical information is that they require. And again, who has the technical capacity to guess and to come up with that documentation or whatever Western science proof that they desire.
So this is WSR, Kim.
Mhm.
So it's not being proposed to connect to the road, highway road.
You know the Northern Road Link is going to connect up to the Martin Falls Road, which is
Right,
going
but it's
down.
not. There's three separate processes, Kim.
But we can't talk about them as separate. I mean, the cumulative effects are all overlapping.
But I'm just responding to you. The Webequie Supply Road, right, is a separate project if it gets approved or not, because the mine doesn't really need Webequie Supply Road. It needs a north-south road than a Webequie Supply Road, and that if this gets approved, then it's something that Webequie, is part of their aspirations. But at this point in this session, it's actually the Webequie Supply Road, and that if the Northern Road Link and the car project, who are separate processes, if they get approved and Webequie gets approved, yes, Webequie Supply Road's road will be implicated on those approvals in terms of all season access to a highway. So it's not a done deal around an all access road for Webequie. I mean, a mine doesn't need Webequie Supply Road. It's just Webequie's aspirations. It's an economic development road to help facilitate some business opportunities and employment opportunities for its members. So this session is about the WSR and the study area in the Webequie Supply Road.
Well, I'll if there's any Ginoogaming members on the line that want to contribute further, I'd love to hear from them. But just in general, the message I've heard loud and clear is Ginoogaming is not at all against the road as far as, Webequie's interests go. It is that Ginoogaming wants to be involved in these conversations, knowing they're a part of bigger impacts into the region. And according to their accommodation and consultation protocols, as well as their water declarations, their rights have the potential to be impacted through the long-term vision and eventual development of this area. And they do request to be participating in this in a bigger way, and they do require financial supports to do so. Miigwech.
Just a follow-up question, Kim. Are you getting funded by the federal government?
There's a minor amount of impact assessment agency funding that is directly going to be triggered when the environmental impact statement is released. It is nothing in between then and now.
Okay.
Any other comments from community members? Okay, I'll continue on then and talk a bit about some of the other issues or questions that were raised in our community meeting. And beyond capacity funding, there was a question about studies on insects as well. There was some expressed concern about permafrost in the area. And then there was quite a bit concern about sourcing of aggregates. So where's the aggregate material going to come from? And then other questions on construction staging. So more as to where the work fronts would be, whether it was going to be a single construction work front moving in one direction or two work fronts working from either end. So that is something that will be determined at a much later date. In terms of the permafrost, the area, our teams have been out in the field doing geotechnical work and ground penetrating radar work, and it's a known discontinuous permafrost area, and they haven't encountered any permafrost in their work. And in terms of the insect studies, I can maybe call on Ange to talk about that. We don't do specific insect studies, but there's certainly observations made as part of doing the overall work. Ange, did you want to add anything to that?
I don't really have a whole lot to add. You're right. We don't do specific insect studies. We just take opportunistic sightings when we're out doing other work. And I would say the main reason why we don't do insect specific studies is because there aren't any species at risk insects in the Webequie area. So normally, if we're going to do that, we would be, in the south, we would look at rusty patch bumblebee habitat, or something like that, or some other dragonflies that are on the species at risk list.
Okay, thanks, Ange. So let's maybe now we can just open it up to questions and comments if community members have any.
Kim has her hand up.
Oh, Kim, didn't see your hand there. Sorry.
Sorry, I just had a quick question on the insect SAR. So we've been in conversations with Environment Canada more recently, just about it was specifically to bumblebees, and kind of the acknowledgement that they're not fully aware of the range of those insects, especially at-risk insect species in the north. So I know they're not currently documented in the north, but has there been any discussion about, I'll say, experimental insect collection to try to scan to see if those species at risk are up there?
At the moment, well, in the past studies, we have not. And we don't have anything proposed at the moment. And Craig can speak to this as well. There aren't any further field studies planned. We finished the baseline work and are going to be submitting the baseline report for review. So I don't know what else to say At this
I-
point, we aren't doing any further baseline collection or
Yeah, I can comment just a little bit. Yeah, I mean, we recognize the importance of insects to the biological food web, and certainly from a productivity point of view, their connection to bats and birds as food sources, and so as Ange pointed out, we haven't done a concerted sort of effort to survey insects and even using relatively innovative techniques. I mean, the extent of sort of insect population is quite extensive. I think scientific literature indicates probably close to 22,000 different types of insects you could encounter in a boreal forest situation. And so, we're relying on scientific literature to give us an understanding of how to characterize what insects we might encounter or find in the study area. But also, as Ange pointed out, we do have biology teams that are out there doing all sorts of different things on whether it's bats or birds. And so, we'll make those observations of the types of most common insects we would be likely to expect on the landscape. So yeah, that's kind of our approach. And I think we've been in discussion with Environment Canada and Climate Change a bit on this. I think I could say that they're generally comfortable with our approach, recognizing that, this type of detailed insect sort of surveying that you might need to do is quite extensive and could be quite on its own a very comprehensive study.
Yeah, I think it should be noted too that that when we submit a project description to the federal government, they tell us what to study. That's how it is in Canada. With a province, we submit a terms of reference, and it's a back and forth public review process, what the final environmental work plan is for the terms of reference. So so Environment Canada and Climate Change, they put that in their scope to us.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair in general. I know it's generally a frustration, just the absence of literature that exists in the far north for species distribution. It's just, it's always a shame when those gaps aren't better attempted to be filled, but we understand the economic limitations of the studies.
Any other comments or questions?
I've got more of a procedural question, but I'll leave it if Ginoogaming has anything further first.
Doesn't look like it. Kim, I don't see any hands up or.
Calvin's trying to connect, but he's having. Well,
I think she said someone's trying to connect, but having troubles doing so.
Okay.
hold on.
Kim, did you want to go ahead with your procedural question in the meantime?
Sure, it was just surrounding the finalization of the minutes. I know you guys were a bit delayed getting, from the November 2020 meeting.
That's right.
Yeah, you guys were a bit delayed getting it to us, and then we were a bit delayed getting the edits back. The final minutes that went in the documentation there, can you please confirm the version or if the edits were ever incorporated?
We will definitely look into that, Kim, and get back to you very shortly on that.
Okay, miigwech. I've got the edits on file if a refresh is needed.
Kim, can you send the edits, the version to us? I can get our team to look at it today.
Sure. Who do you want it to go to? Yourself and Dawn?
Yes,
And
please.
Craig?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can confirm today.
Does it look like we've got, I don't see any other questions or comments here.
Yeah, I think Marianne was just trying to get Calvin on.
Oh, okay.
He's having some connection challenges.
Where is it? Is it on now? Good afternoon. Bonjour. Yeah, there's something going on here with my laptop.
No. We got you now, Calvin.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make reference, I guess, to what Tim brought up there earlier. You know, there was a story of our elders back in the day. I was, of course, in high school and whatnot, but we had the community of Webequie come to our center here within our community, and we bonded with that community only because they were with us for about at least a month, maybe a month and a half. And the community basically, you know, it was like, why send people to an arena in town? There's a fire, we'll have to get evacuated. So, you know, in that day, late Gabriel Eacham, he was the chief, and also Leslie O'Nabigan was the chief also within that period. And they jointly worked on trying to get our neighboring communities, our brothers and sisters to the north, come to our community or to a neighboring First Nation, albeit you know, the municipality of Greenstone back in the day was Long Lac and Drolton. You know, they had more resources, and they had you know, probably facilities to do this. But you know what? Ginoogaming came together that one summer, and we welcomed the people of Webequie to our community. And I must say, at the time, I was younger at the time. I joined in with a little bit of the security work, but we housed them in our gym, in our rec hall. We used to call it our rec hall back in the day. Today, it's known as the band office. And you know, it was very nice to have the community of Webequie here in Ginoogaming. We bonded quite well. The languages were very fluent back then. And I, for one, am fluent in my language. And I was so overjoyed just to hear all the conversations taking place, you know. They're over at the powwow grounds, they're out on the land. And, they enjoyed their time while they were here, and we all welcomed them with open arms, so to speak. And, you know, that's the part we share with Webequie today. That's the part that always has been acknowledged to our elders that have passed on, that were around those days. And I'm sure, you know, in the community of Webequie, there is that connections that we all have as communities, as First Nation communities. And that's the part where, you know, I get kind of my gut feeling inside, where all these policies and procedures, you know, tell you that you can't be a part of something, and we should be. You know, it's something that it's all going to affect us at one point or another, right? The way we can say that it's just an economic arm to this, and it's not going to really impact us. But you know what? At the end of the day, you know, whatever we do in Anishinaabe Indian land, the Indian, what they call, you know, mainstream calls us, you know, the Indian economic engine. We are a part of all that. You know, us as First Nations, you know, we've all had to drive something that basically We want to better our communities, and we respect that fact that Webequie wants to do that, and we want to show them and give them our support. That's why we want to be a part of this. It's not to say no and tell the government. The government tells, oh, you can be a part of it, you can't be a part of it. We like to come to the aid of Webequie and help them out. EA once again. You know, for them, for the province and the feds to tell us no, that's a slap in the face to our historic relationships that we had built over the years, and inviting them into our community. So, did my chief Gabriel Eacham go in vain because he can't have this, support of Webequie to help each other? Perhaps, but I'm not going to let it happen. We'll still be banging on the doors, and we're going to support, help them out. That's why we want to be a part of this. We want to make sure that things are done right for them also. So, us as Ginoogaming, everybody calls us a community in the south, below the undertaking. And Webequie and our brothers to the north in the Pawa regions, they're above the undertaking. That's fine. But you know what? We have experiences that we want to share with the Webequie community to help them out on how just a single road can impact you, how a single road can impact you socially, mentally, culturally, environmentally, all those adjectives you want to use. A road will impact you. We want to share those experiences with them. Because today, we are not the same community as we were in 1929. When the first road, Highway 11, came to our community. We had a lot of rich values and cultures and medicinal teachings. We had the shamans, we had the shaking tents, we had all that stuff of what our community should have. Today we kind of lost them because of the road, quote unquote, the road. Now imagine that. You want to be able to be a part of that when the road goes to Webequie. You want to share those experiences and all the webbing that we have to cut through, ministries, policies, legislations from the feds that hamper us to be a vibrant community culturally, spiritually, environmentally, all those nice adjectives that everyone uses. But today, we're mainstream now. They deal with us like as if we're mainstream. But we're not. We're a separate community. Want to be respected that way. Hold your identity, your dignity. That's basically why we want to be a part of this. Give our helping hand to Webequie once again, to share those, the fears, of course, there's a lot of positives too, right? I won't say object to that. There is positives too. There's a lot of, I realize all the frustrations with, cost of living and whatnot up there. And I visited the communities a few times in my past tenure as a counselor. But for today, for the people that all were around since we had the community of Webequie within our community, we accept them with open arms. I just want to see those relationships continue, not let legislative policies get in our way of our relationship, because it's not what we see as something that should hamper us in being a part of this CEA.
Calvin, I do appreciate the kind words and wise words you shared regards to Webequie. They do share stories with me, of their travels in their youth and their teenagehood, and when they went to school and all around that region, and fond memories, as you were saying. Calvin, the principles around Webequie's approach to this, around the Webequie Supply Road, was nation to nation, and that's still there. And if there's if we, if we can bring it back to the council or the Webequie Supply Project team, if you want a in-person meeting in your community, we can make that happen. To share, your experiences about what happened and what's still happening, I guess, since they're moving that highway for an open pit mine and that journey, that you guys were on prior to Highway 11 being constructed and what it's done to your communities. So I leave that open, and we can make something happen in your community to bring some of our Webequie folks and break bread if you like, and share your experience. Any other comments, questions? Perhaps on that note as well, our team here, we sent the notice out 2 weeks ago. We always give 2 weeks notices to the communities that we're doing this. And within that notice, we always say that we're flexible. We're just timing this out throughout the first round, and that this is not the one and only we're offering. We're offering, at your convenience and time and place that we would meet you guys as well face to face or online, or there are special topics you want to chat about when it comes to the Webequie Supply Road environmental impact assessment. So that's always there. Our team is pretty flexible. We tend to show up when we're asked most of the time. Logistics work out.
Yeah, and like you said, Mike, we can arrange it whatever way is most convenient for the community as well too.
Mhm.
Any more questions or comments?
Just a general one on logistics, John. Does Webequie have funding for, like, if Ginoogaming was interested in an in-person meeting, is there some sort of separate pot of funding that you guys would be able to support, like a single meeting event?
Mike?
Yeah, I guess if you mean if we're showing up and to Ginoogaming, for instance, and there's some community-based costs, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like if the community was interested in hosting something, like a meeting or something like that, like is there any sort of funding that would be provided or could be provided just to fund that type of a session and maybe some food or whatever else the community might desire?
We probably can offset some of those expenses, Kim, if you guys are open to a session, and if it's a hall or food or coffee and stuff like that, like we're open to that.
Okay, good.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, with that, thank you everyone for joining us today, and hopefully we can meet in person as we were just sort of talking about, and we look forward to it. And please, send us your comments or questions about the project whenever they come up, and we'll do our best to respond to them. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Miigwech.